You still babysit at 30? My sister laughed at the family dinner. Some of us actually have careers, she smirked. But when her son refused to speak to her therapist, he called out only one name, mine. Her jaw dropped when I walked in. I'm Vanessa Carson, and I've lived in this small town in Michigan my whole life. Growing up, I was always the quieter one, happy with a good book or spending time with my parents at the bookstore they owned. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable enough, and I loved the simplicity of it all. I had a bond with my mom, especially Nora, who was warm and kind, and my dad James, who worked long hours at the store but always made time for family. Then there was my sister, Ava. Ava was 4 years younger than me, but the difference in our personalities made it feel like she was light years ahead. She was the popular one in school, the one with the perfect grades, the one who seemed to always have everything figured out. She was the one who would dream big, the one who had plans that involved being noticed, being seen. Me? I was content with smaller goals. I went to college to study child development, and after graduating, I started a small daycare business. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I thrived on helping kids learn, grow, and build their confidence. I built a life around it, and I was proud of what I had. Ava, on the other hand, was all about big city dreams. She moved to Chicago and quickly became entrenched in the corporate world. She got a job at a top-tier marketing firm and began dating Derek, a wealthy businessman who seemed to have it all. They were the picture of success. I'd hear about their fancy parties and charity events, the places they traveled to, and the people they rubbed elbows with. Meanwhile, I was home in our small town, building a life that felt more like real life than anything my sister seemed to have. The gap between us grew, but I wasn't resentful. Ava's life was her life, and mine was mine. Still, she always had a way of making me feel, well, lesser. Her snide comments about my job were frequent. So, babysitting again, she'd ask, her voice dripping with sarcasm, as if she was doing something inherently more important with her life. It stung sometimes, but I didn't let it get to me. Or at least, I tried not to. Then came the family dinner. It was Mom's birthday, and as usual, everyone was gathered at our parents' house. I knew Ava would be running late. She always did. But when she finally showed up, she had Derek with her, of course. It was the usual dynamic, Ava in the spotlight, Derek by her side, talking about their latest venture or charity gala, while I quietly listened and tried to avoid the usual judgmental looks. We all sat down to dinner, and after a couple of hours, Ava couldn't resist taking her shot. So, Vanessa, she said with a smirk, how's the daycare going? Still playing with other people's kids for a living? Her tone wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. I didn't flinch. It's going well, I said calmly, not wanting to engage in the usual back and forth. It's been keeping me busy. Well, that's good, she said, barely looking at me, her eyes flitting around the table. Some of us actually have careers, though. You know, jobs where we don't have to babysit. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I swallowed it down. Not everyone defines success the same way, Ava. She made a dismissive sound, rolling her eyes. Yeah, sure. Whatever. The room fell silent for a moment. Derek cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. But I could feel her words still hanging in the air. After dinner, I retreated to my old room for the night, the tension still simmering beneath my skin. I didn't want to admit it, but Ava's words always got to me. They cut deep, even though I'd been living my life the way I wanted. I didn't need her approval, but it would have been nice to have her respect. A week later, I got a call from Ava. It was the last thing I expected. Vanessa, I need you, she said, her voice tight with stress. It's Henry. Henry was her son. He was 6 years old, sweet but sensitive. I hadn't spent much time with him recently, not like I used to when he was younger. I could hear the panic in Ava's voice, so I immediately agreed to help, not fully understanding what was going on. He's refusing to speak to anyone, Ava continued. Not to me, not to Derek, not even to his therapist. But he keeps asking for you. He says he wants you. I don't know what to do. I didn't know why Henry was acting like this. I wasn't a child psychologist, but I knew that kids sometimes just needed someone they felt safe with. Maybe I could help. I agreed to come to Chicago the following weekend to see if I could do something. When I arrived, Ava and Derek were waiting at the door, looking exhausted. Ava's eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. Derek, on the other hand, looked like he was at the end of his rope. Come in, Ava said, her voice strained. He's in the living room. I walked in, my heart aching at the sight of Henry sitting on the couch, his head down, his little hands clutching a stuffed animal. He didn't even look up when I entered. I knelt down in front of him, trying to soften my voice. Hey, buddy. It's me, Vanessa. At first, nothing. He stayed silent, his head still down. But then, slowly, he raised his eyes and looked at me. I could see the hint of recognition in his gaze, but there was something else there, fear, confusion. He didn't speak, but his eyes held me captive. I want Vanessa, he whispered, almost like he was afraid to say it out loud. Ava's jaw dropped. She stepped forward, eyes wide. What, he's never done this before, she murmured, looking at Derek for confirmation. Derek, too, was staring at me in disbelief. I nodded, not quite sure what to say. I turned back to Henry. I'm here, buddy. Let's talk, okay? It wasn't an immediate breakthrough, but after some time, Henry finally started to open up, little by little. He didn't speak much, but he started responding to simple questions, following my lead in games, and eventually, even starting to play with toys on his own. It wasn't a dramatic change overnight, but it was enough to show progress. Ava and Derek hovered nervously in the background, unsure of how to proceed. I could tell they didn't know what to do, and it was becoming clear that Henry had found some kind of solace in me. It wasn't just that he refused to speak to anyone else, it was that he specifically called for me. That realization hit Ava hard. Over the next few weeks, she kept asking me to come over, hoping for more breakthroughs, but there was a strange tension between us. Ava didn't quite know what to make of everything. For the next few weeks, I made the trip to Chicago more frequently than I'd ever planned. Every time I arrived, Henry seemed to make a little more progress, but it was slow, small steps. The therapist's office was still a battleground for him, but at home, with me present, Henry would talk, laugh, and interact. It was clear that something in him had shifted. Ava, however, remained distant. I could see how badly she wanted to be the one to help her son, but it was almost like she didn't know how. It broke my heart to watch her struggle, but I couldn't deny that part of me felt a bit vindicated by the fact that Henry turned to me, and not her. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room with Henry, I noticed Ava watching us from the doorway. She didn't say anything at first. Her arms were crossed, her gaze focused on Henry, who was now coloring in a book beside me. I smiled at her, but she didn't return it. Instead, she sighed and finally spoke. I don't get it, she muttered, almost to herself. Why does he need you so much? Why not me? I didn't know how to answer her. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a miracle worker. All I knew was that Henry needed something, and right now, I was the person he was comfortable with. I gave her a soft smile. Maybe it's not about you, Ava. Maybe he just needs someone who isn't caught up in everything else, the pressure, the expectations, all the adult stuff. Sometimes, kids just need someone to listen, without all the noise. She looked away, her eyes momentarily filling with frustration, but then they softened, and she stepped closer. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'd been so wrapped up in my own life that I didn't even notice what was happening to him. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Ava had always been the ambitious one, the one who set her sights on big goals, and in the process, it felt like she lost sight of the smaller, more intimate parts of life, like being there for her son. It wasn't that she didn't love him, it was just that, for her, success had always come in the form of accolades and achievements, not quiet moments like the one I shared with Henry. I don't know how to fix this, she said, her voice trembling now. I've tried everything, Vanessa. But nothing seems to work. You're doing your best, I said softly. That's all anyone can do. There was a long pause before Ava spoke again. Maybe I've been too harsh on you. I always made fun of what you did, what your life looked like, and I guess I thought it was inferior to mine. But Henry, he needs you, and maybe that means you're doing something right. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged it. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled faintly. I'm just doing what I love. That's all. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were seeing each other without the usual judgment or competition. Ava wasn't trying to outdo me anymore, she was just a mother, desperate to help her son, and I was the sister who had something to offer. The tension in the room began to melt, and I realized that despite everything, there was still a bond between us. But even as we talked more openly in that moment, something still wasn't right. There was this strange undercurrent of guilt in Ava's voice, like she knew she'd been neglecting Henry in ways she couldn't quite undo. And no matter how many times I reassured her that she was doing her best, I could tell it wasn't enough for her. She felt like she was failing as a mother. In the weeks that followed, Henry's progress continued. He started to talk more during his therapy sessions, although it was still hard for him to open up to the therapist the same way he did with me. But with each visit, things improved. Henry became more comfortable, more willing to express himself, and slowly but surely, Ava began to take a more active role in his recovery. It was clear she was trying, even if it wasn't perfect. Still, I found myself back at their home almost every weekend, taking care of Henry when Ava and Derek needed time for themselves. It was a strange dynamic. There was this push and pull between us, where Ava was both grateful for my presence but also, I sensed, a little resentful. I understood, in a way. She wanted to be the mother her son needed, but it was clear she wasn't used to feeling so vulnerable, so uncertain. One Saturday afternoon, Ava and I went for a walk while Derek stayed home with Henry. It was one of those rare moments when it felt like we were reconnecting, but the air was still thick with unspoken tension. I don't know how you do it, Vanessa, she said quietly, glancing at me as we walked. You're so good with kids. I don't have that patience. I don't know how to be like you. I didn't know how to respond to that. Ava had always been the one who had everything figured out, and now, she was admitting to me that she felt inadequate in a way I never expected. I don't know, I said, my voice soft. Maybe it's just that I'm okay with the quiet moments. I've always been the steady one. You're more focused on the big picture, and that's fine, too. We all have different strengths. She nodded slowly, but her eyes were distant. I wish I could be more like you sometimes. It was strange to hear her say that. Ava had always seemed to have it all: money, career, a perfect partner. But in that moment, she seemed more human than I'd ever seen her. You're not doing anything wrong, I reassured her. You're just finding your way with him. And that's okay. There was a long pause before she finally spoke again, this time her voice barely a whisper. I've always been the one chasing after the next big thing. I thought I was doing the right thing for Henry, for all of us. But maybe I missed the point. I didn't know how to comfort her, so I just walked beside her, letting her words hang in the air between us. Ava was a woman who had always been so driven by her own ambition, and now, it felt like she was finally realizing that her priorities had shifted, and not necessarily in the way she had expected. And then, in the quiet of that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me and Henry. It was about Ava finding her own way back to her family. I wasn't the one who could fix everything, but maybe I could help her see what was right in front of her. But that was easier said than done. Because as much as Ava had started to change, there was still the question of how long it would take her to fully reconcile the person she had been with the mother she wanted to become. And then there was me. Still babysitting, still quietly doing what I loved. I had no idea how this story would play out, but I knew it wouldn't be over just yet. As the weeks dragged on, it became increasingly apparent that Ava wasn't going to make a dramatic, overnight transformation. She tried, no doubt about that. She attended more therapy sessions with Henry, she spent more time at home, and she did her best to be present for him. But there were still moments when I could feel her slipping back into the pattern she'd always known, focused on her career, focused on the big picture, with Henry and his needs becoming secondary again. I could see it, even if she didn't want to admit it. Her career always came first. Whenever I wasn't there, it was almost like she became lost in the swirl of her other responsibilities. The difference was, I was there for Henry, and I wasn't going anywhere. It didn't take long before I began to see cracks in her new facade. Ava had always been the type to juggle everything at once, but it was becoming clear that her priorities were still disjointed. Henry's progress, though steady, was still fragile. He'd make strides forward when I was around, but when I wasn't, he'd pull back into himself. I wasn't naive enough to think everything would change just because I was helping, but I had become a pivotal figure in Henry's life, something that Ava couldn't ignore anymore, even though she wanted to. One afternoon, I received a call from Ava. Her voice was tight, strained. "Vanessa, can you come over? I think we need to talk." I could tell something had shifted in her tone, and though I knew I was probably walking into another emotional moment, I agreed without hesitation. When I arrived at their house, it wasn't Henry who greeted me at the door, but Ava, standing with a look on her face that I couldn't quite read. "You need to talk to Henry," she said, barely looking at me. "He's asking for you again. I don't know what else to do. He says he won't talk to anyone unless you're here." I didn't respond right away. I could see the struggle in her eyes. She wanted me to fix everything, to be the one who could make everything okay, and part of me wanted to help. But there was something else there, something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about helping Henry anymore. It had become a test of my patience and my own feelings about the way Ava had treated me over the years. I walked into the living room, and Henry was sitting there, looking at me with his wide, trusting eyes. The moment he saw me, his face broke into a small, tentative smile. "Vanessa," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I smiled back and sat down next to him. "Hey, buddy. How are you doing?" He didn't respond right away, but his little hand reached for mine. He squeezed it tightly, and that was all the answer I needed. He wasn't fully back to where he'd been before everything had spiraled, but he was making progress. Ava lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. I could see her watching us with a strange mix of frustration and helplessness. I understood it. I really did. I wasn't trying to steal her son from her, but I had become a crucial part of his healing, and that made her uncomfortable. After a few moments, I stood up and turned to her. "Ava, I think we need to talk." She didn't respond at first, but then she nodded stiffly and walked into the kitchen, as if she knew the conversation was coming. I followed her, closing the door behind me. "I don't know what you want me to say, Vanessa," she said quietly, her back to me. "I've been trying. But he's not responding to me. He needs you, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong." I let out a long breath. "It's not about what you're doing wrong, Ava. It's about what you're doing right, and what you're not doing. You can't keep expecting to have it all. You've been so focused on your career and on this perfect life, that you've neglected what's right in front of you. Henry needs you. He needs his mother, not just a successful professional." Ava stiffened. "What are you saying? That I'm a bad mom?" "No," I said, holding up a hand. "I'm not saying you're a bad mom. But you've been putting your career and your image before him for too long. He's a little boy, Ava. And he's struggling. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be present." She turned to face me now, and there was something in her eyes, something raw and vulnerable, that I hadn't seen before. "I don't know how to be that for him," she said, her voice cracking. I walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're trying. And that's enough for now." For a moment, there was silence. I could see Ava's internal struggle playing out on her face, but I knew this was the moment that would define where things would go from here. She had to make a choice, to continue down the path of prioritizing her image and her ambitions, or to finally be the mother Henry needed her to be. I had to make a choice too. I could have walked away, let Ava take the reins from here, but deep down I knew that this wasn't just about Henry anymore. It was about me, and about my own feelings of inadequacy, too. I had spent so many years listening to Ava belittle my life, and now, here I was, holding the power to decide whether I'd continue to play the role of the helper or if I would demand something for myself. "I'm not going to keep stepping in for you, Ava," I said slowly. "You need to step up. Henry needs to know you're here, not just physically, but emotionally." Ava nodded, the tears finally welling up in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered. "You don't have to do it alone," I said, squeezing her hand. "But you do have to try. For him." The next few days were tense. Ava started making more of an effort to engage with Henry, showing up for his therapy sessions, spending time with him after school. I continued to visit and help where I could, but I made sure I was clear about my boundaries. I wasn't going to be the emotional crutch she leaned on anymore, nor was I going to let her guilt me into fixing everything. This was her moment to shine, or to fail. I wasn't going to be her safety net forever. The turning point came one evening when Ava called me, sounding almost relieved. "Vanessa," she said, her voice different. "I just wanted to let you know. I think Henry and I are going to be okay. I think I'm starting to understand what he needs." I smiled, knowing that this was as much for her as it was for him. "That's great, Ava. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't think I could have done it without you." I didn't need to say much more. I knew the shift had happened. Ava wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect her to be. But in that moment, she had finally acknowledged the one thing I'd been trying to get her to see for years: family comes first. Success isn't measured in trophies or business deals. It's about showing up when it counts. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I had been the constant in Henry's life, the person who showed up when it mattered. I didn't need to take the credit, but it felt satisfying nonetheless. Ava had finally seen me for who I really was, not the lesser one, not the babysitter, but someone who had the strength to help when it was needed most.